Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sneha, and I also have Bianca here with me, and we're going to talk on the topic incident response planning, the ultimate team sport.
Thanks, Sneha. Before we get started, just wanted to say that today we're going to be using sports analogies and concepts to illustrate incident response planning frameworks. By no means are Sneha or I sports aficionados or fanatics, so we don't expect to be using like expert terms or anything like that. But we hope that the usage of sports analogies will help you think about these frameworks in an accessible way. Before we get started, just a quick intro on who we are.
For those of you I haven't met, I'm Sneha Regmi. I work as a director of security operations at a firm. Prior to this, I was leading security operations at One Medical, which is where I got to meet Bianca. And I'm really passionate about everything incident response, especially the planning side of it, because it's taught me so much that I've applied it other areas of my career. And I've actually used those skills to move up the career ladder as well. Outside of work, I love traveling. I'm a huge dog lover. I have 2 dogs myself, so that's where I spend a lot of my time. And I'll let Bianca intro herself now.
Hi, everyone. Bianca Sellinger. I am the Director of Enterprise Ethics and Compliance with a focus on privacy at One Medical, where I had the opportunity to meet Sneha. I have had about 7 years of experience in the privacy and compliance industry, and I'm really passionate about incident response and incident response planning because of the opportunities it affords me to build cross-functional relationships and really flex those skills of relationship building. Outside of work, I am a new mom to a beautiful 8-month-old daughter, and I'm a recent transplant to the Los Angeles area from the Bay Area. So I spend a lot of my time just exploring my new neighborhood and acquainting myself with all the parks and outdoor spaces to enjoy with my daughter. So, as I mentioned, Sneha and I met when we were at One Medical together, where there we had an opportunity to build out the incident response program from the ground up, really laying the foundation. While there, we led a number of high-stress situations, driving towards resolution and communications all the way up to the executive level. You could say that our experience together really allowed us to become crisis management ninjas.
So yeah, what Bianca is alluding to is how IR planning has really become our lifestyle. Over the course of several years, applying those skills and getting that experience, these skills have now become reflexes for us, almost second nature. Not only have these skills helped us resolve incidents, they've also helped us handle other complex problems at work and even personal life. There's actually a really funny story about a personal crisis I went through. Well, funny now. Had to reschedule my whole wedding 4 days before the wedding due to COVID. And so I went into that incident response mode and really put on my crisis management hat and was able to apply the skills that I learned from work. So really at its core, it's a simple framework for problem solving. You take a big problem, you break it down into smaller chunks, and then you execute on them. And just like sports, it's all about the team effort. It's not only about your skills. You take your skills and then you force multiply it with the team skills and then execute on the problem. So to summarize, all of these skills have really taught us to look at problems now with a solution-driven mindset and a let's get it done kind of attitude. So keeping that in mind, here's what we'll cover today. We have 4 core concepts to share with you, starting with build a strong foundation, build your team roster, run your plays, and watch the game film. And in the end, we'll also recap and leave you with some takeaways. So throughout the chat, throughout the presentation, if you have thoughts, comments, questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll leave some time in the end for questions. So please don't hesitate to ask us any questions or share your thoughts in the chat. So let's jump right in. Build a strong foundation, IR planning 101. So before you think of any sports game where, the coach or the players are trying to figure out how to win the game, how to execute, they really have to understand what is the game. What are the rules of the game? What are elements that go into the game? Similarly, you really have to start with What is an incident in your environment? This is often taken for granted, but I highly recommend starting here, especially for security incidents, because not every security incident is an incident in other business unit or vice versa. For example, not every IT incident or SRE incident is a security incident. So really start with the definition of what a security incident is in your environment. Then take that and use that to differentiate between an alert versus an incident versus a breach. Once you've done that, I recommend also defining how the declaration process will work. Who is authorized to declare a security incident? How will they declare it? This will avoid the situation of multiple other teams declaring security incidents without the security team's knowledge. Once you've done that, then I recommend setting severities and SLAs. Now, again, there's lots of frameworks for this. You can apply many, but what's important is to customize that to your environment, whether it's the scope, functional impact, or the kind of data exposed in the incident. Often use severity ratings are listed here, critical to low or SEV 0 to SEV 3. The call out here is that whatever you decide, make sure your plan articulates that clearly and how you're planning to use it as well. Once you've done that, it's going to be important to define roles and responsibilities. This is often the most challenging one because it can be very overwhelming when you think of how cross-functional an incident can be. So what we recommend is start with these three categories. Your core IR team, CIRT. This is often your security operations or security incident response team that is driving the security incident forward. This also includes your incident commander, incident handlers, and whatnot. Then you have your business IR team. These are the stakeholders you bring in the incident as needed, whether it is legal, privacy, IT, engineering, and whatnot. Then often overlooked is the third parties. Some security incidents will need you to engage your cybersecurity insurance company or your incident response retainer. So think about those, what you already have, those partnership with those third parties, and define that in your plan so that in the middle of a crisis, you're not confused who engages them, who even has that declaration or engagement phone number. Simple things like that can waste time. So make sure the plan includes that. Once you've done that, you take those roles and responsibilities and you have to assign ownership. Assigning ownership early is going to save you time. This is where I recommend using the RACI model for decision and comms ownership. For those of you not familiar with RACI, RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. This is a very commonly used project management framework for driving projects and tasks ownership. So you could use that in the world of IR as well to assign most commonly seen initiatives or tasks in an incident. One example could be who's responsible for sending customer notifications. Articulate that in the RACI table in the plan, get that sign off from that team early so that you're not spending time in the incident figuring out who's going to do it. And then lastly, for IR 101, calm down. I know we talk about this so much in the world of IR, but unfortunately, we don't execute it enough. The moment we hear the word incident, everyone starts panicking. What I've done, how I've set up my mind to not panic, is I tell myself that even if it's a worst case scenario where I think I have no time to spare, by rushing into judgment, by acting impulsively, I actually am taking 10 steps backwards in the long run of the incident. So really take that 2 minutes, take that 5 minutes, whatever it is you need, think, assess the situation, align with your team, and then only execute. Which brings me to this framework called Align, Communicate, Confirm, Execute, ACCE, that I've used throughout my career. Again, this is not something you can find on the internet. This is just something personally I've been using that has helped me, not only in incidents, but also projects. So how I look at this and how I use this framework is I ask myself, Have we aligned? Are we all on the same page? Have we communicated in writing what we've aligned on? Have we confirmed the necessary approvals, the next steps in writing again before we get into execution? And at the execution state, do we have an execution plan? Who's owning it? So really using this framework to ask yourself questions. So some questions are here. For the sake of time, I won't go through all of these, but these will be available for you to reference later and how you can apply this framework in incidents, right from the alignment up to the execution level. Now you've done all of that. You've set your core, plan. You have your elements. You know your severities. It's going to be important to build your team roster. That is figuring out team dynamics. For this, let's think of an example of a hockey game. Again, I'm not a hockey expert, but I have drawn some learnings from how roles within a hockey game can be similar to how within a team or an incident. So let's start with the coach. In the hockey game, the coach is responsible for coming up with a strategy and execution plan. This is similar to your incident commander. Sometimes incident manager, they often can be interchangeable. And then you have your captain, center, who's constantly chasing the puck. This is your core technical lead, following on the execution plan laid out by the incident commander. Then you have your defense forwards filling specific roles. This is like the BIRT, Business Incident Response Team we talked about. And then finally, goalie. The goalie's job is to keep the puck out of the net. Think of this again as your incident manager who's keeping execs and over-escalation away so that the core team can work on resolving the incident. The key takeaway with this example is that it really takes all of these roles to work together to win the game. So similarly, it takes all of those roles in an incident to work together to resolve the incident successfully. Next, let's take a look at the concept of bench in sports. For those of you not familiar, bench is a concept in many sports games, not just hockey, where the idea is you have a stream of players ready on standby so that if a player is injured or they need an extra player, you have that ready. So you may be thinking, well, I barely have a team of 3 or 5. How do I get these series of players? The takeaway here is more about thinking ahead and being proactive. This is where cross-training, flex roles during non-incident times will really help you handle a crisis better. And this will also help when resources are limited. Again, we can look at the penalty situation in a hockey game where generally when the team gets the penalty, they're one player down. They can't say, well, that's not fair. The other team has an extra player. I'm not going to play. That's not how it works. So similarly, if it's that Thursday or that Friday, you're ready to log off, half your team is out on a conference, one person is sick, your best engineer is not there today, and something critical comes, you still have to handle it. And this is what I mean by cross-training, flex roles during non-incident times or low severity incidents. They're going to help you in a crisis. Now you've done all of that. It's going to be really important to understanding your team, especially the personalities in your team. Different teams have different personalities. There's sometimes a lot of type A, a lot of type B, oversharers, undersharers, overthinkers, and whatnot. So really use people to their strengths in a crisis. Also foster a team culture of collaboration and trust where people know to leave the egos at the door. Otherwise, a crisis can really bring up core team problems to the forefront. So create a culture that way, even if your best engineer is assigned documentation in a certain incident, there's no egos being hurt. They understand they're playing a role. Then read the room. This is for everyone. Really read the room, but especially for managers and leaders. You have to know when to lean in, when to lean out. Listen to your team. It's a balance of also strategic and tactical leadership styles. And then finally, for team dynamics here, cross-functional buy-in. we talked about this earlier, how cross-functional an incident often is. So really establishing that trust and credibility, not only with your team, but the cross-functional partners you often have to work with, is going to be really key to handling the incident successfully. If you don't have the trust and credibility, no matter how many action items you assign in the document, it's really not going to matter because working that incident will be painful. So this is where, think of it like sponsors in car racing. So I recently watched Formula One game and I was just amazed to see how it was all about sponsors. Not to say other sports games aren't, but this one especially. It stood out to me that the racers are able to race because the sponsors are all there who have invested in them and cheering for them. So that's the same concept. Really get that sponsorship from those teams early and ahead of time. And finally, don't forget you're part of a team as well. How you react can change the course of the incident, especially as a leader. So take that deep breath, get your head in the game, align, and then only execute. And with that, I will pass it on to Bianca, who will cover the next core topics.
Thanks, Sneha. So now that you've laid your foundation with your IR plan, you've built your roster and identified your teams, the next step is really to run your plays or to conduct IR plan testing. So in IR plan testing, or what we call tabletop exercises commonly, this is an opportunity for you to get practice, for you to get those reps in. Similar to football, X's and O's, which is what you see on the right-hand side of your screen, tabletop exercises give you an opportunity to identify who needs to be where and when. What role are they going to play? What direction are they going to be moving in? And then repeat that over and over again until it becomes reflexive. It's important to know, too, that when you're creating these plays and running those tests, that they can be as simple or as complex as is necessary for the needs of your business and your team. It's not that every tabletop exercise has to be so complex with a myriad of different injections of strange facts and interesting, fact patterns. It can be simple because that's what's necessary for your team. And you need to get those reps in and practice so that you know reflexively how to react to something that happens very often in your environment. It's also critical to think about phase testing. So to start, you want to make sure that your core team has gotten those reps in of practice. And then once they feel comfortable, you can expand to include others in your business incident response team or your BIRT. That way, once you have your core team set, then you can give opportunities to practice for others in cross-functional teams. It's also important to think about accountability and ownership of all tasks, meaning that just because it's practice, just because it's like a scrimmage, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be simulating real life scenarios. So for example, if you're running through a tabletop and you're kind of glossing over a section of your response saying, well, we know that Sneha would do this, so we're just going to proceed and go forward beyond that. No, really take a step to think about and articulate what would you do. Write it down, because we don't want to take anything for granted. Nothing is a given. It very well may be that others are assuming that Sneha's on point or Bianca's on point, so we're not going over it. But on game day, when it actually comes to fruition, everyone's kind of looking at each other and going like this, right? So that's why you really need to document and make sure that nothing is a given. You've identified the steps that you'll need to take. And when you're documenting, people have something to reference. So that documentation piece is critical, or it didn't happen. In my space, in privacy and compliance, oftentimes documentation is necessary to demonstrate that we're meeting the minimum criteria of fulfilling regulatory requirements. So if we need to be able to show, yes, we regularly test, we regularly ensure that our bar for the level of our program is set high, and we have paperwork to show it, that's really key. And so make sure that everybody knows to document, and then also where to find that documentation. That was our third concept of IR plan testing or running your plays. Our final concept is this thought of watching your game film, or in our world, incident retrospectives. So, like in football or in basketball and many other sports, there's this concept of watching film. It's an opportunity for you to sit down, take a look back at how your team performed, via recording, and really analyze and think about what went well and what didn't go well, and where do you have opportunities for improvement. As a baseline, we always want to approach these types of conversations or these retrospectives from a place of blamelessness, meaning that everybody who was playing a part in that incident did the very best that they could at that time with the resources that they were given. And we are here to discuss how to improve as a process rather than thinking about individual performance. So that baseline of blamelessness is really key to making people feel comfortable that they can provide and receive honest feedback. So that feedback loop of action and effect, meaning we identify that we did X, now we know that it will produce Y. How do we need to tweak that approach to improve it next time? I think, learning from your team's performance really only strengthens your program because it forces you to iterate over and over and identify who was strong in what, or what processes need to be tweaked. It's critical that when you conduct an incident retrospective, that you not only discuss and, recap what occurred, but that you assign action items, meaning, all right, we've talked about this, we know that we need to fix that. Who is going to be on point to take care of that from conceptualization all the way to execution? We need to identify the action item and then an owner. And that way you can always close the loop. You can do so by starting with short-term fixes all the way up to long-term fixes. And short-term things could be tweaking a process, rewriting some documentation, all the way to long-term fixes, such as rethinking a vendor relationship, investing in new tooling. That way you have an opportunity to kind of look at it from a big picture perspective and always feel like you're making gains, even though some of those longer term fixes might require executive leadership buy-in, budgetary considerations, etc., that we know kind of take time. And that's it really for our 4 concepts. I'm going to leave you with some takeaways. So firstly, we want to stress that problem-solving skills are IR agnostic. As Sneha said, your personal life could become injected with some of those skills that you apply in your professional life. And that's not a bad thing because it really teaches you how to approach things from a logical and calm place. The framework of aligning, communicating, confirming, and executing, or ACCE, is a really quick and easy way to think about how you're going to center yourself as you approach an incident. Team personalities and dynamics can impact your incident response, as well as how you build those relationships and communicate with one another. So thinking about IR, not just as a process-driven framework, but also a people-driven one. You need to account for the different personalities and the way that you talk to one another. And finally, like in sports, practice makes perfect. And you want to ensure that you can flex all the way up to something more complex once you start from a place of simplicity. And that's just got to be tailored to your environment and what suits your needs. Finally, feedback is a gift. We want to make sure that it can be freely given and received. Again, thinking about that concept of a blameless retrospective, because people just ultimately want to improve. And how can you do that as a team? You have to create that environment of honesty and candor. So that's it for our takeaways. We really want to thank you for joining us today. We have left our LinkedIn profile information. Please feel free to reach out. We are here for this community and are grateful for the opportunity to be with you today. So we're going to save some time now for any questions that come up in the chat. Please feel free. Thank you so much.
See a lot of comments. Can we put the over-anxious C-suite in the penalty box? Yeah, no, I wish, right, it was like that. But I think the learning here, as I was mentioning, and I think Bianca touched upon too, is that I think when the incident manager, for example, is calm and is able to influence that up and down, I think they're like the middle point between the two. So I think that's at least what I've done. Most incidents where I've had really, even at the start of my career, good managers who were able to balance that up and down. I felt like C-suites were able to also calm down. So it really depends how calm your middleman is, also middleman or woman is also.
Yeah, agreed, Sneha. I really think that part of your role as an incident commander, when you're keeping the over-anxious C-suite away from your team so that they can execute and do their job, is kind of like, in Sneha's example, when you're a wedding coordinator, right? You got to keep everybody calm. You have to project that aura of, we've got this, it's all under control. And so when you're calm, that means your execs as well as your team are not panicking. So you have to kind of model that behavior. And even if inside you might be panicking, that's why that step of calm down for real, taking those deep breaths and really centering yourself could make such a big difference.
Yeah, 100%. Going through the comments, if there's any other questions. While we're waiting on some other questions, what I will also quickly share is some appendix materials with you all that might help while we're looking at other questions soon. So let me pull that up again. Can you all see my screen back? Yeah, there we go. So let me get out of this. So we didn't share this today, but there's some appendix materials we've referenced here that we'll share out in the deck again when you get the deck. Lots of questions you can use in an incident, some framework, some plan structure that you can get started, simple examples of RACI here, a simple example of how you can structure your IR report. Bianca was talking about assigning action items. Again, there could be as simple as this in your incident retro doc with links to where that's going to be tracked. And then some useful links that we found useful and how different frameworks you can apply.
Thanks, Sneha. It does look like we have one question from Avni. So the question is, do you think that if an employee doesn't have a specific strength, that we should have them develop that or work on developing their strong strengths? That's a good question. Maybe I'll tackle that first, Sneha. I really think it's incumbent upon your team member. Ask them. I really think that you should ask them, because in some respects, people might want to continue to strengthen what they're already good at, or some people want to be very intentional about identifying the things that they might not be very good at or that they don't have experience with. So that developing of things that might be not, at the forefront of their skill set, because they want to become, that utility player who can do many things. So just have that conversation and really encourage them to be candid about what they're looking for in terms of their career and professional development.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that, what Bianca said, is, there's ways to stress test both, right? I think in a crisis, use your strengths. In non-crisis situations where you can fail safely, that's when you test improve your weaknesses.
This is a really great conversation. I just wanted to hop in and say we've got to get our next talk. So everybody, make sure you connect with Bianca. Make sure you check out Sneha and ask them all the questions you have offline through LinkedIn. And we're going to get our next speaker lined up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.